Good evening, friends, and welcome to the December edition of Cafe Muse Literary Salon Online, brought to you. I'm Leah Johnson, and I'll be co-hosting this evening with Ellen Cole. Tonight, we're pleased to present poets Judith Bowles and Rose Solari. I'll be introducing Judith, and Ellen will introduce Rose. Thank you to Michael Davis for the classical guitar music and to Henry Crawford for the beautiful accompanying visuals. Tonight's reading will be followed by a short Q&A moderated by Cafe Muse founder and leader, Karen Lanier. Please enter your questions for the poets in the chat. Our next Post the Pandemic will be on Wednesday, December 16th at 7 p.m. We'll be featuring Betsy Holloman Burke, reading from her new book, All That Remains. Betsy will be joined by guest poets Donna Denis and Dinasta Miskayan Thomas. The next Cafe Muse will be on Monday, January 4th, and will feature poets Don Colburn and Leslie Wheeler. In her poem, A Certain Blindness, Judith Bowles posits, by reflection, things can be transformed. And indeed, her latest collection of poems, Unlocatable Source, is a beautiful testament to this power. Watching the sun set in When the Sun Goes Down becomes at once an immersion in and a foretaste of our demise. In Non-Catholic Girl, the misery of a young girl's upheaved belly threatening to erupt in her throat leads to an empathic experience of the crucified Jesus, whose statue she passes each day in this murder. Bowles says, and I wondered if he had anything inside of him that stung. Did his eyes water? Did he vomit? Ever? In Close to My Side, mistaking an oncoming biker in the park for a horse becomes the opportunity for reverie on how loving an animal can provide a sense of safety for a forlorn child. I tried every day to get enough, says Bowles, put my face in her mane for the ocean of her, that strong neck, a wave rising, ready to arrive. The poem's artifacts transformed by the power of being mind and elegant writing. Judith Bowles is the author of 2 collections of poetry published by Turning Point, Unlocatable Source in 2019 and The Gatherer in an MFA in creative writing from university, where she taught creative writing. For many years, she also led a senior group of poets in Washington, D.C., and edited 3 volumes of their work. In 2019, Bowles was selected as at the Bloedel Reserve on Bainbridge Island, Washington. Her works appeared in Gargoyle, the Ekphrastic Review, and the Kenyon Review, among others, and in the 2018 anthology, Such Friends as These, edited by David Keplinger. And now, Judith.
And thanks to Cafe Muse so much, because for being here. I have to say it's a great gift to the community. And it's been going on for a long time, thanks to the vision of Karen Lanier. And since 1999, she told me, they have been every Monday night, the first Monday of the month. They have been never missed a night, never missed a month since 1999. And I think that's extraordinary, especially when you consider the situation since March. And I'm just so grateful for what they do to the poetry community and for the community that wants to have the audience of poetry too. And so my thanks to Karen Alanier and to Henry Crawford and to Renee Garrity and Susan Oakey and Leah Johnson and Ellen Cole. Thank you. It is December 7th. And that, if you are of a certain age, that is a date that is indelibly impressed upon you. Franklin Roosevelt said that it was a day that will live in infamy because it was the day that Pearl Harbor was struck by the Japanese and bombed. But I'm also struck by a detail of it, which is that on that day, 2,403 people were killed at Pearl Harbor. And this was a shock that has been with generations of horror. But that with our pandemic, there is a 2,500 people dying by the day. And so it is as if Pearl Harbor is going on and on. And I thought to myself, well, maybe if the virus had some sound, if it was a bomb, it would get our attention. And this would be a wonderful thing, but it's silent. My first poem is about that, and it's called Homecoming. And it's about how silently we are being stalked. There was a rally where people shouted, and a very fine spray, like a cartoon bubble, aerosoled their words, lent them real weight. Specific gravity will tell us how long these sounds will float in the air, looking for home. It's silent indeed. Sometimes I wonder where poems come from or what it is that actually makes a poem. What is a poem? How does it organize itself to be written? And in a way, I have the feeling that poems organize themselves to be written. I know we write them, but it's something that Seamus Heaney said in his Nobel address that has stayed with me very much, and it makes me sort of understand what it is. He says that poetry is an order, which it does. It definitely orders, even disorder, it orders. But that he said that it's an order where we can at last grow up to that which we stored up while we were growing. And it's such a wonderful thing to think that what you stored up, and you don't know why you did, but there it is, and it's to be worked with and to be transformed. And how you learn these things, how you learn to be sort of a person and a poet. And you learn sometimes just from being with people the way that they are. Their very being is the thing that teaches you. This is a poem in which I learned from my father how to care and not be frightened of the other, somebody that was strange. In this case, it was a blind man who was coming to our house for dinner. It's called My Father Explains. A blind man came for dinner to our house. My father described the plate that sat before him as if it were a clock. Chicken would be at 3, potatoes at 6, peas at 9. The man shut his eyes and smiled at a lesson so clearly stated that you would almost have had to be blind to imagine. I wondered, when the man shut his eyes, was he picturing my father blind to give himself company? I shut my eyes, and so did my brother, and we tried to eat with our eyes without seeing. So it was the beginning of me being able to identify with somebody that was different and who frightened me by his very being. And as far as teaching goes, teaching is such a sacred thing. And this is a a letter that I wrote to one of my science teacher in junior high school. And his name was J. Bailey Bush, which we loved because we said that we were all his little shrubs. And he was a marvelous man with a great intellect. And he had high hopes for us, which I'm afraid were rather dashed that year because it was this kind of sex education he was giving us through the plant life. And we weren't ready to get it. And so here's my letter to J. Bailey Bush. There is no wind this afternoon, so the moonflower's face is wide and smooth, and the tight bud wrapped behind will follow soon. How does a flower become a fruit, you asked? How indeed? 8th grade science was something we sat through. We attended each other more than your lessons, our ears fully employed, listening to our own swelling bodies. Billy Licklider in the front row, after listening to the tale of the pistil, the stamen, the ripe ovules, spoke for us all. That is so scientific. We didn't want to know, not that year. You wrote our names on the blackboard, first day of class, standing at ease, and so thin in the suit that you wore every day. 24 names in neat little rows while we shifted and shuffled our feet. Your names are your history. What you learn here will lighten your load. And you drop the chalk like a coin on your desk. And it was a coin, a very valuable coin. So if you are trying to teach something to somebody and they don't get it quite, just be patient. The day will come. And the same thing is true of this. My father was a neurosurgeon. And this was his effort to describe to us something very familiar to him, which was the brain. And it's called The Neurosurgeon Teaches. My father taught like someone who remembered not knowing. This had its comforts, his effort to be with us in the dark. He handled brains in his hands. Mothers held babies like that. Gray folds and wrinkles, his textbook. Brains were everyday things to him, another kitchen sink, where he stood one day telling us how it worked, showed us with his fist held high, thumb tucked tight in the fold, like the limbic system, snug in its place. Wrist was the brainstem, made our hearts beat, our breaths breathe. Knuckles, the cerebrum, in charge of our learning, every move that we made. My brother inched closer, kicked my ankle. I wailed. Dad walked to the black ashtray he'd brought from his study. A cigarette smoked there, all by itself. So as I say, just be patient. They might grow up to learn what you want them to. And the struggle of learning is something that I have remembered very vividly, almost more vividly than I wish I had, but there it is. The learning to write cursive was a huge endeavor for me. And so here's a poem about that. And it was a very interesting thing to trace it backwards. Learning to write cursive. My letters wouldn't connect into words. I couldn't describe to the nuns how the loops of the W took me away from my desk to a dark place where I was alone. The dip of the J never rose to continue and join. It was stuck. The first letter never believed anything followed, and my pencil raced with my heart to catch a word on the fly. There seemed no way to make units that spoke what they were trying to say, because the loop that joined T to H was a root with a knot tied tight. This struggle sunk over the years when my fingers grew up, but it lurked in the landscape of every white page. And then something that my generation learned to do that I'm so happy has passed not into total non-existence, but slightly, and that's learning to smoke. When I grew up, if you look at the movies back in the 40s and 50s, it's cigarettes for all the movie stars. And our parents smoked, and that's what we did and wanted to do when we grew up. And that was a signal that we were grown up, and that's all we wanted. So this was learning to smoke, which happily I have unlearned, but it took a big struggle. Learning to smoke. The first time I smoked on Beverly's bed, she taught me how to inhale by showing me the deep drag that pulls the smoke in and down the throat and made the tip glow like the fireflies we tried to keep alive in old pickle jars. Everything in me said no and clamped shut. I let my cheeks puff out like a fish while I decided how long to hold the nasty taste, like a dare. Bev said, think of Bette Davis in All About Eve, where she waved the cigarette around like a flashlight while she stunned the crowd. Then in the silence that followed, she lifted her chin, sucked in that smoke, and taking her time, blew it out in one definitive stream. She showed me that long angle of her throat, shut her eyes to take it all in. She's making herself bigger. She's getting enormous with her face close to his. What it was to be a grown-up at age 14 for a deep breath or two, I became. So there was learning and there was teaching and there was listening. And a number of years ago, I lost the hearing in one ear. So I'm deaf in one ear. And what I've noted is that that ear that is deaf does not stop trying to hear. And that's something as I've gotten older that I'm just so aware of, nothing will stop it from trying to hear. This is called white morning light. White morning light rises behind mountains like milk, filling a glass that never spills. Trees stand in shade, waiting, silent as trees, in the absence of light, to show who they are. Wind through the window keeps its sound secret. Like hands, it turns the leaves up, then over, a quick change of mind. Half deaf, my body strains like a dog on a leash toward sound, which moves through trees, through leaves, long grasses, their tassels afloat. A breeze gives no thought to the whirlblast of dust in its wake, to the crack of a spark breathed into loud life, the thick history of a deep-rooted oak struck. All evidence of the world as it lives in its backyard, so full of fragrance it throbs as if trying to speak. Are there still people who knew us as we once were? Even at night, my good ear hears light. My deaf ear still waits for the window to open. and for listening also. When I first heard Irish playwrights, I thought I had gone to heaven. I thought I want to sound that way. I want to be that way. I want to be Irish. And I was in some Irish plays in college. And one of them was The Playboy of the Western World. And having those words that I was able to say was the beginning of my understanding that language had a power that was greater than anything I had ever encountered. And this is called The Playboy, and it's for John Billington Synge. I was in plays during college, one after the other. Our prompter was someone in crew who had already done lights and had time, with a script in her lap, to fill in the silence of a missed cue or lapse in midstream. I needed her help in the second scene when she called from the wings. Are the poets of the Dingle Bay, and I've heard all times it's the poets are your like, fine fiery fellows with great rages when their tempers roused. My lines in her mouth, traced by her finger on their Irish road that had emptied themselves into space before I could find a way to make them my own, still had their magic to bring me awake like a song I'd been waiting to sing. There was nothing flat from Ohio in the cadence. I wanted those words in my mouth to save me. Nothing against Ohio, believe me. A couple more poems before I finish. This one is from Key West. And you know, in the 19th century, the Bahamians were a big presence in Key West, and cockfighting was a big thing. And now when you go there, you see the roosters and the chickens running through traffic, especially in the old city. And it's such an extraordinary thing to see, just out walking along with the cars and the people. And yet I think that their forebears maybe were some of these that had been bred for the cockfight. I saw a rooster one day on Bahama Street, and I wondered. Key West rooster on Bahama Street. And the auburn rooster stood on the corner in the alley, waiting. He raised one foot in the air, scratched the ages-old dirt, getting ready for what? For wind, against which he shut his eyes and lowered his head into stillness, so utterly still that he seemed to grow solid. Something solid, housing feathers, grown wild like children, set free all at once, a swarm come to life under the wing of the wind. As if he were saying his life, as if he were showing what had come before, long before this March day in the 21st century. As if he remembered being thrust toward another like himself for something beyond his hoard. His beak knew to hammer, his feet to claw softness. He had learned to dig toward. Then came the stillness. He strutted around and was lifted. And my final one tonight is a love poem. And I've not written many of them because I get shy about writing a love poem, but I decided, I had read Stanley Kunitz's Touch Me, and I thought to myself, listen, if he's got the guts to do it, I do too. So it's called Anniversary Song. I put myself near you with these words, as if we hadn't woken up together in bed this morning, your hand on mine, And with a gentle squeeze, we agreed on a half hour more of such ease. Better to ask a wave where it came from before the ocean would show its heave than to trace the source of our handhold. There is distance so vast it can't be seen, except in small versions of itself, which the kindness of nature permits. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ellen Cole, and Judy, thank you for that very beautiful reading. I'm going to introduce our next reader, and I'm very happy to do so because she's a dear friend, Rose Solari, who I met 10 years ago when I showed up at the Writers Center to take a class on poetic forms. I found Rose was an astute and charismatic teacher, an enthusiastic mentor, and someone I continued to study with for many years. I discovered she's an extraordinary poet as well as a fine teacher. She's the winner of numerous poetry awards and the author of 3 full-length poetry collections, The Last Girl, Orpheus in the Park, and Difficult Weather, as well as numerous journal publications. She's also the author of a novel, A Secret Woman, a play, Looking for Guinevere, and Rose and her husband, Jimmy Patterson, are the publishers of Allen Squire Publishing, a small literary press. Rose is the creative director and editor for the press. And I have to say, Rose is pretty much a polymath of the arts. In addition to being a wonderful poet, novelist, playwright, she's also a dancer who does ballet and modern dance. She's an actress who has performed on stage and in multimedia productions, and is an artist who creates delicate and intricate collages. She's also an artist who is an impressive performer of her own poetry, which you'll hear in just a moment. Rose's poems combine lyricism and inventive language with striking images of nature, the urban environment, and the human body. Her poems are lit by jazz and the rhythms of the city. They're infused with vulnerability, with physicality, and emotions that inhabit the body as well as the mind. Myths rise into being in her poems and twist themselves into the fabric of modern life. I'm going to stop talking now and let Rose speak for herself. So, ladies and gentlemen, here she is, the beautiful and multi-talented Rose Solari.
Oh my goodness, Ellen, that was quite an introduction. I hope no one's disappointed after that beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. I just want to say before I start, I have a little theme going tonight because we've all been apart for so long, and because Cafe Muse has been in my life since I first began to write. I've kind of built my set list, as it were, with the idea of referencing and touching on the many writing communities that have fed me throughout the years. So thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Karen, Henry, the whole crew. Also, a little treat for you guys. I know Henry's posted the sales links for Judy's and my books. If you go to the link for me, if you buy within the next couple days, say till Wednesday night at midnight, and this is just for the folks attending this reading. If you buy if you buy Orpheus in the Park or my most recent collection, The Last Girl, you get a copy of Difficult Weather for free. Difficult Weather was my first book. It won the Columbia Book Award. Karen Alanier was part of the Poetry Society that gave that award. So that's how far we go back. And many of the poems in Difficult Weather came into being in the workshops I took with Stanley Plumley when I got my MFA at the University of Maryland. So Maryland was definitely a big community for me in undergrad and in graduate school. And I thought I'd start with a poem. I'm going to read some poems tonight that I don't often read. This one is called The Weather, from the book Difficult Weather. I was a little obsessed with weather back then. And it's also one of the great things that Stanley Plumley broke open in me was a way to pay attention to the natural world. I grew up in a kind of concrete suburb, urban environment, didn't know the names of trees for a long time. And Stan, with his just sort of natural way of living in and with that world, helped me to see it. So this is a love poem. I write a lot of love poems. This is a love poem, and I wrote it in Stanley's class, and I think those of you who knew him might see the influence. It's called The Weather. I'm beginning to believe you must have brought the winter with you, the cold air tucked inside your jacket like a letter you hadn't mailed yet to a friend. In the weeks after you promised you'd be back, the trees around my house shrugged off their leaves. The field we danced in, to a band that could have been any band, turned solid. From my window in the morning now, the sky is dark as night. Outside the house, my breath comes visible and quick. I don't know you well enough to know what silence means. In the space between your last phone call and now, the distance from here to Texas feels too wide to keep this fiction of love suspended in air. But I remember watching you walk along the sidewalk the night we met, seeing your face go light, then dark, then light again beneath the street lamps, your long legs swinging from so high in your hips with such insistent music, I felt desire turn me cold inside with plans. And I remember how unprepared we were for that sudden change in the weather. Me hugging myself, you cupping your fingers around a fading cigarette. I opened my eyes sometime the next morning to feel your body rocking slowly over and into me, like a narrow tree forgetting itself in the wind. I tried to say something. You covered my mouth and said, "Hold on to me, make me warm." My second book, Orpheus in the Park, was published by that force of nature known as Grace Cavalieri, who is a long-standing friend of this whole community I'm looking at in little tiny Hollywood Squares boxes. And Grace was enormously helpful in organizing the book because it has two intertwining strands. One is, as Ellen mentioned, retellings of classical myths, fairy tales, biblical stories, and so on. And then the other is a strand of elegies, some for people who died, my parents, others, but also elegies for lost ideas, lost illusions, lost other selves, maybe. So I'm going to share one of those. This is from Orpheus in the Park, and it's called Elegy for the Sleeping Girl. Perhaps I make too much of it. Maybe my sister has even forgotten that New Year's Eve when the man she'd wanted to marry stood her up. Maybe it's only me who still recalls the blue silk dress, so tight our father turned his head away, and the hair, a tall pile of sculpted curls. She dressed for a big night, dinner and dancing, and hints he dropped that tucked in the pocket of his dress uniform, He'd carry the ring she thought would make her whole. 12 years older, she'd always been a chaotic mystery to me. And that night I studied her again, watching her brush the peach-colored powder over her cheeks and spray herself with windsong. At 8:30, my father began to wonder aloud about the traffic. At 9, she called the base. The corporal on duty said he had indeed checked out. Then my mother insisted on dealing her into a game of rummy, but I played my sister's hand while she paced, her body jerked to the window by every sound. A car door slammed, our next door neighbors greeting guests. At 10:30, my mother hissed that Marine or no Marine, she'd give him a piece of her mind. My sister already knew, of course, that we'd never see him again. She went to bed, slept until my mother woke her for the next night's dinner. At the table, in her pajamas, her face bare and pale, she looked to me like an ailing child, save for her magnificent hair, tilted now a little to one side. We didn't mention him. Her pain had made a space around her no one, not even my mother, would dare to enter. Maybe my sister has forgotten that man, those hours, her life so busy now that memory has no room to post its flags of humiliation. Accused, always, in our family of making too much of things, I might in this case agree, except for this. Years later, she would name her first child after him. Some years later, I found a new community when I had a wonderful opportunity to teach in Oxford, teach in their creative writing program. I was a visiting writer for some months, and I learned some very important things, I think, in my time there. British poets tend to be more formal. They tend to be a little more philosophical. And I think this poem called Making is something that grew out of my time there. It's a little more philosophical and less personal, perhaps, though of course it's personal, but it's a different tone. It's also an unrhymed sonnet. It's 14 lines with a couplet, but it's not end-rhymed. And this actually appeared in an anthology from the Creative Writing Center at Oxford called Initiate. This is called Making. As if the self is, say, a pile of small bricks, varied in size and color, but all designed like Lego, to be pieced together in almost innumerable ways. As if you're allowed to trade, as you are in poker, for a different 2 or 3, but never all. As if the play clock, as in football, keeps ticking, getting louder as you build and rebuild first entire walls and then more cautious, exchange this door perhaps for that, never again to knock the whole thing down and just start over. As if the dream of starting over is all you've salvaged from the scramble. That and how it felt to think you were in charge. Another thing that happens when we get older is that, and this shocked me when it first happened, is that not only do our family members die, our older family members die, dear friends die, but people we have been lovers with die. And that's a particular kind of loss, even if it's long in the past. At least to me, it feels very much a particular kind of loss. And so I'm going to read a poem from The Last Girl that's about that. Some of you who've studied journalism know that when you write a reported article, you're supposed to tell us who, what, when, where, how. You may have heard that somewhere in a class. This poem is called Who, What, When. It's the same old story. Girl meets boy, girl thinks that's it. But boy is already mixed up in somebody else's story. So girl settles for girl pal status. She's good at that. 2 years on, they meet again at somebody's sister's party, but now the story's run by her shiny new wedding ring. A theme emerges, something to do with time. Resolution's unclear. A few years, a new setting, almost cliched, the mutual friend's out-of-town weekend wedding. She wears her divorce like a French movie actress. He's had a crash course in living outside of everyone else's rules. For 2 nights and a day, they live what might be the start of a new story, one they can scribble together. It looks good on paper and good in the photos after. But boy is already committed to singing that old, I gotta get down the road, see what's around the next bend story. And girl, although she pretends, wants someone who'll stay. You know the rest. The slow-mo drift, how they talk every week, every month, and then not. No reason, you say, to tell this particular not quite a story. Except that years later, she who is not in any sense anymore a girl hears that the man that boy became is dead. A quick stroke, then 2 weeks of the brain's slow decline. Perhaps it is up to you, wise reader, to judge what kind of a story this is, why it should matter now to the girl who isn't, to the woman who is and is crying. I have a couple more. I'm going to share Reuben's here. And this is another community-based poem. And it also, I think, I'm going to end with a new one. So this is my second to last, but I'm going to end with a new one. But this, I think, was the first of me beginning to write about music. I'm working on a new manuscript now that has a lot of music poems in it. And some of you know from my work that my mom was an amazing pianist. I have Catherine Young very wisely pointed out that I have a poem in every one of my books in which a woman is sitting at the piano. And I think part of my mother's instilling of that in me may have had something to do with my great love for the jazz singer and pianist Shirley Horn. Some of you may know her. She was a DC native. She used to play at One Step Down every New Year's Eve. I saw her many times, and she had a very signature style. If you don't know her work, she had a very signature style where she would pause in the most interesting moments. A song you're used to hearing the melody line flow through, she'd stop and wait and then sing again. It made your heart jump out of your chest. Anyway, this is a poem in memoriam of Shirley Horn. It's loosely modeled after Frank O'Hara's incredible poem, The Day Lady Died, which I bet a lot of you know, his poem for Billie Holiday. This is my way of paying tribute to that great, amazing woman who gave me so many amazing heights of music. And it's called That Day. I was on my way to give a poetry reading with Reuben and Nancy and some people I didn't know, and I was running late, and on the car radio, WPFW was playing Shirley Horn's version of Green, a song I used to think was silly until she made me hear it, and I thought, this is a good omen, I'll make it on time. Then the DJ played You Won't Forget Me, and I remembered the first time I heard it, how she turned me to putty before the opening verse, a luminous eternity was over. She was beginning Here's to Life when I thought, oh. When I got to the reading, Ruben had already heard the news, and we talked about her in DC, about her and Miles, about how she never in her lifetime got the fame that she deserved, how it should have been different. And I don't recall just what was playing on the way home. Fever, but beautiful. When I started crying, seeing her walk into One Step Down on the arm of her bassist, beautiful Charles. On New Year's Eve, late, of course, which was the whole point, how she kept us waiting. While she shrugged off her mink and settled herself at the keyboard, lifting her face up and into the circle of light at the mic as if she could taste it, and nodding once slowly at Charles while we held our breath. And I'm going to finish with a poem that Richard Peabody, another incredible member of this community, has published. Over the years, Richard has included several of my poems in his Gargoyle magazine, which is really a huge anthology, and I'm always grateful. Just a reminder again, if you buy from the ASP site, The Last Girl or Orpheus in the Park, you get a free copy of the new edition of Difficult Weather. It was out of print for a long time. We've got a new edition of it with a fabulous introduction by the poet Catherine Young, poet and translator, who I believe is reading in Cafe Muse in 2021. And Judy, thank you for reading with me again. I love reading with you. It's just wonderful. And thank you all for joining us. This poem is called Metal. And I'm hoping everybody knows that metal is a kind of music as well as substance. So it'll help you understand the poem. It's funny, I started with Young poems and I'm going back to Young again. Metal. It cannonballed into 9th grade, creating tribes with sacred symbols. The Rush kids spraying 2112 on their denim jackets. The AC/DC heads in perpetual mourning, scrawling back in black on the walls. It brought you a boyfriend who loved Aerosmith, painted their winged logo onto a cape to wear over your precious silver glitter tube top. You picked Led Zeppelin for Shiver and Thrum, but also for Plant, who years before you knew the word androgyny, wore ruffled girls' shirts above the significant bulge in his jeans. Sure, there was folk rock too, and prog rock, and some of your friends had already found jazz. But nothing raged as pure, as honest metal, a sound that hurt the way your new girl body hurt as it lengthened and swelled and began its monthly bleed. Though you'd yet to have sex in an elevator or shake anyone all night long, those songs were your channel, howling at your parents as you never could. Are you angry? Have I frightened you yet? Do you love me? Thanks.
Well, my goodness, what a reading tonight. Thank you so much, Rose. What a very moving reading. And thank you, Judy. Wow, you both hit all these chords, these emotional chords. And I'm supposed to lead the question and answer period. And so I usually start off with a question, and I hope that somebody else will put one into the chat. We'll see what happens. But I make these observations. So Judy, teaching and learning was a big theme for you tonight. And Rose, how things fit together, and you know, the essence of trying to construct things, put them together in whatever way. So I want to know what your hope is for this evening in terms of what the audience, our wonderful audience, should walk away with tonight. So who would like to go first?
Judy?
Well, I'd say Rose probably wants to go first. I'm pretty sure. Oh, goodness. Well, can we be honest? Yes, we want them to have had a good time. No, I mean, I really mean that, because if you read Ron Howard's article in the Post, I think it was on Friday, it had to do with how intimidating poetry is, even for a wonderful critic like Ron Charles. He was intimidated by poetry. But, you know, if you make it accessible, if you can have your poets talking and have them reading and have it be interesting and something that keeps people awake, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing. So that's what I want, just to have a good time.
Yeah, I'll second that. And I think I hope that people experience the kind of click that I sometimes experience when I hear other poets read, or when I read them on the page and I think, that just clarified something for me, or that just made something make sense to me that hasn't made sense to me before. I think I look for that in poems, that sense of discovery, where you're going along and then, oh, it comes together. And there's so many writers in this audience. I know you know that feeling from writing, but I hope that my work creates that feeling in the presentation and the reading of it. Well, that it offers some insight, sheds some light.
Well said. Well said.
Well, I think those are two very good answers to the question. I have a tendency to ask the hard, probing questions, and so I think you did a great job, both of you. I see that Ralph Nitkin has asked a question, and that is, do you write towards some reader, or does it just go out from you? What is the source of your writing, I guess, is what he's asking. So the floor is open.
No, I don't write toward a person. I write toward myself. And I really do try to write to get toward what it is that's happening in a poem that I'm trying to discover, not discover for somebody else, but discover for me. And if I can do that, then that's exactly the words that Rose was using about the click, the thing that surprises, that you didn't know was there, is there, and you've learned it from yourself.
Some of my poems are gift poems in particular. They're written as letters to particular people, or particular, you know, I have some poems for my husband. I have poems for friends that are very specifically gift poems. But if I'm not working on one of those, I often feel, and this may echo Judy in a slightly different way, I often feel when I'm writing that there's someone out there who's my best self, like the best of me is what I'm writing towards. And the poem is kind of this string that I'm using to pull myself towards that better self, if that makes sense. That better, more enlightened, more intelligent self.
Mm-hmm.
That's the person I'm writing towards most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you know what Gertrude Stein said? She said, I write for myself and strangers. So, Cafe Muse co-host, did anybody else see a question that I overlooked in the chat? I think we're drawing to a close, but if there was one more question, we could handle it.
Okay. I will just remind people of what's coming up again. And thank you all so much for coming this evening. It was wonderful. Cafe Muse will be on Monday, January 4th, and will feature poets Don Colburn and Leslie Wheeler. And just another reminder about the next Poets versus the Pandemic, which is next Wednesday, December 16th at 7 p.m. with Betsy Holloman Burke, reading from All That Remains, and guest poets Donna Denise and Dinasta Miss Cayenne Thomas. And I think that's it for this evening. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Okay.
Yes,
Thanks everybody for coming, and you'll be able to see this all on YouTube within the next day or two. So, so stay close to Facebook, and we're going to pass the link around.